Play ball!
Welcome back to Living the Next Chapter. Happy to have you here with us today. We have a guest with me today who is a new author and first time ever on a podcast. Can we all just stand for a moment of celebration as we welcome another author to the podcast? First time ever. Did a great job too. William R. Douglas is here. He wrote a novel based it in the future. 2166, the year 2166, and guess what happens there? There's no more baseball. I'll give all the baseball fans a second to get up off the floor. Yes, in the year 2166, no baseball. No popcorn. No 7-inning stretch. No wave. No umpires. No goofy people dressed up in costumes, mascots. Huh. It's interesting because the book that William is presenting to us today, he puts out a scenario and says, hey, what if? What if we lost our passion for our national sport? What if we lost baseball? And there's an underlying current as well we're going to talk about on Living the Next Chapter. You found it. If you're a baseball fan, hold on. Grab some popcorn. We're in for a ride. You ready? Let's set the tone. Here we go. My author today, first-time podcast guest. Feel so happy to have him on the podcast today. William R. Douglas is here with us today to chat about his book. Welcome to the podcast. Nice to have you here.
Thank you, David, for this opportunity. I'm really excited and glad you reached out to me to come on your show, Living the Next Chapter, and talk about the book.
Okay, so I hope you have many more podcast interviews after this. Thank you for letting us be your host for your first time on a podcast. I hope you enjoy the ride. Please keep your hands inside the ride at all times and stay seated for the entire performance. And I hope you enjoy our chat together. Thank you for making time.
You bet.
Very good. Can you share with our listeners where in the world you are? I'm up in Canada.
I'm in the lovely town of McHenry, Illinois, which is about an hour northwest of the city of Chicago, pretty close to the Wisconsin state line.
Okay.
So I've been here since 1992. I've been living here. It's a great town.
So if I was to make my way down to your town, what would be one of the must see, must do things that I should do if I rolled into town?
Well, one would be to go see the riverfront. It's very beautiful. And there's restaurants along the riverfront you can go dine at, and you can dine al fresco overlooking the river. And it's just a beautiful meal with a beautiful setting.
Awesome.
That'd be one thing. And then there's all kinds of things around town recreationally you can go do. There's trails and parks, and there's even a national bird sanctuary flyaway up north of us, in a place called Glacier Park.
Nice.
It's about 15 minutes north of here.
Nice.
So it's a great area, especially if you love the outdoors.
Amazing. Okay, so you are an author, and like we talked about just in the beginning there before we started chatting, you've written a novel that takes place in the future, and you picked 2166 as the date that your novel embraces. What's the significance of 2166? Why did you pick that year in particular?
Well, the background of the story which takes place before the opening chapters, that there's been a second civil war in America 40 years from now. So in the year 2061, on April the 12th, which is exactly 200 years from the anniversary of the American Civil War of the 1860s, there's a second conflict. And it's along cultural lines, conservative, liberal, etc.
Mm-hmm.
And the war lasts until 2065. And then 100 years in the future, after the end of the war, this 12-year-old boy who's a native of the town becomes the focal point in the rediscovery of the lost sport of baseball, which is one of the cultural casualties from the war. So I wanted to make it a full 100 years after the war ended. So I just picked 2166.
So someone who's a huge baseball fan just had their ears perk up a little bit and went,
yeah.
Wait a minute. What is William proposing here? That I'm going to lose my favorite pastime to watch or play? Is that what you're saying, William, that we are at the potential of losing something in the future? Like, oh my gosh, I think you've just made a lot of baseball fans quite nervous with this premise.
Right. Well, I talk about in my prologue the ingredients that went into the formulation of the storyline. And one of them is at the youth baseball level, the numbers are continuing to decline. What's really notable is, number one, the absence of sandlot baseball, which has all but disappeared from the country. And when I was growing up in the 60s, that's really how kids learned to play the game. It was the repetition in sandlot ball and playing it, if not every day, then several times during the week. It was that repetition over and over again of playing the game, enjoying the game, which then translated into being a fan of the game, obviously, and picking your favorite baseball team, which for me is the Chicago White Sox.
There you go.
I know you're a Toronto fan.
Well, there you go. Yeah, we have one team in Canada, so that's all we represent. But hey, we did win a few. We did win a few.
That's true.
So that's good.
And the Blue Jays are a notorious White Sox destroyer. So
we will get along for this interview, though. I promise there'll be no.
Yeah, that's okay. That's all right.
Wild pitches.
All in good fun. But anyway, so you take that ingredient. I do know that travel ball has gotten a lot more popular, but the problem with travel ball is it's just like trying out for a play in school. You have to try out for it, and you have to make the cut. And guess what? They're only going to pick about 12, 13 people.
Yeah.
So that's, you add that, then you add in the component of, when I was growing up, you could watch just about every game of the year of your favorite team on free television. Mm-hmm. And now that's no longer the case. They've made it more difficult to watch your hometown baseball club. And now I know, you can watch games on Apple and YouTube, and you can buy a package and watch, just about any baseball game you want, except for the blackout games, which, oh, by the way, happen to be in the town you live in or in the region that you live in.
Yep. And
so another component is the continuing rise in the popularity of soccer. And in the last several years, lacrosse is getting very popular as well. Mm-hmm. And so you add all that together, you have an ingredient, I think, down the road where, there's warning signs that, baseball could potentially be in trouble. You look at the price of the games it costs. I mean, routinely, if you're going to go to a baseball game, it's going to cost you $100 at least for the ticket, parking, food, and so on and so forth. And quite often, even more than that, to be honest. And then you look at some of the adult fans that have become disenfranchised with the sport because the games are too long, they're quote boring, quote unquote, or they're upset at the whole monetary issue involved, especially at the professional level and what some of the players make. So you add all that together, and then you take in some of the other elements that I talk about in the prologue, And then, I just had this idea one day, well, what if a sport like baseball were to die? Oh, I forgot to add another component was I read an article many, many years ago that was about games before the Civil War of the 1860s that kids used to play all the time. And now they're lost to history. They're dead. They're extinct.
Mhm.
Kids no longer play them. They don't even know about them. They're just, like I say, they're lost to history. So that was another component. You add all that in and like, oh, it's okay. We have a story here potentially. So
Yeah, that's interesting because there's actually, like you said, there's games that have fallen away.
right.
And
Right.
like,
Like,
I wouldn't even know what they are.
Even as us, like I'm 63, like marbles,
Marbles. Yeah. Pick up sticks, jacks, drop the ball, pick up the jacks.
Right.
All that stuff.
Well, I forgot to add to another component was, what if you take video games and the popularity of video games and how immersive they're becoming, where, you're wearing goggles and you don't even see the real world anymore. You're in this virtual world. And so you add that in there too. It's like, there's so many things that are competing for the kids' attention.
Yeah.
And so there you have it.
And you're losing the physicality of playing sports for some kids today, right?
Correct.
And they're really good with their thumbs and their fingers, and there's got a really good reaction time, but put them out on a baseball diamond and see what they can do, and you don't have that.
And getting back to the loss of sandlot ball, when I go and I watch local games, there's a very distinct visual difference in the caliber of play when you go and visit a travel ball game versus an in-house league game. It seems like typically the in-house league games, they're painful to watch because the kids just don't have the skills developed. They're not practicing as much as the travel ball clubs. They practice just about every day, including during the wintertime. So you see that marked difference, and so if you're in an in-house league and every time you go to bat you're striking out, what happens to that kid? Does he want to come back next year? Why would I want to go back and do that? I could go on a field and kick a ball around really easy. It's so easy to do. You go kick a ball around, but to have a ball coming at me and potentially hits me and hurts me, and I can't ever hit it. Or I hit it poorly. Gosh, what does that do to a kid?
Mm-hmm.
So when we were playing sandlot ball in the 60s, it was that repetition again. And I get back to that word repetition that it helped you increase that hand-eye coordination and helped you zero in on that ball better so that you could, actually hit it and have some fun playing the game.
Yeah. And sandlot ball compared to professional baseball, there was this community, right? Anybody could play, right? It would have to be a professional. You didn't have to, have all the skills. Anyone could step up to the plate and take a swing.
Right. And you didn't have all the parents and grandparents yelling at you or yelling at your teammates and yelling at the umpire. And it was a much more, I think, pleasant experience.
And you just had to figure stuff out.
Yeah, right? You had to figure stuff out.
Was that in? Was that out?
Yeah, right. Well, tie goes to the runner.
Whatever. We got to figure it out together. We don't need a professional here to monitor us. We got this. I'll figure it out. So, so that's quite unique. You know what? I'm actually seeing a parallel with what you're talking about. I'm a musician, and I see less people creating music, and it's leaving it up to the professionals, and less people being interested in learning how to play an instrument. Right? Because you can use software now. You don't actually have to learn how to play the guitar, the piano, or the drums. You just push a button, and you're done. So I'm seeing a little bit of a parallel musically with what you're saying, and that's scary too, to think that
Yeah,
somebody could lose that talent and ability,
right.
and that could be lost to time.
Sure.
So it's a quite interesting premise. I like this. What have you written anything before writing this book?
Not insofar as a novel. I've written
Okay.
stories, I've written technical documentation and, stuff like that, blog posts and stuff like that. But this was my first crack at a novel. I remember early on my grandmother telling me that I had a gift for writing, and, you know, bad on me that I didn't take that kudos earlier and start writing earlier. So it wasn't until 2016 when I actually sat down to actually write a story, and this is what came out of me.
Was there anything in your past, in your career, and things that you were interested in that helped develop you to write a book?
No, I just always seem to have a penchant for writing,
Okay.
nice prose and writing stuff that was coherent and interesting and would catch people's attention. So
Interesting.
yeah, I guess it was just a gift.
Is this going to be the one and only book for you, or do you think there's more in the tank?
I think there's more in the tank. I've actually been wrestling with, well, what if I take this undercurrent in the story, come back 140 years to the year 2061, and actually try to tangle with, gosh, how would this nightmare unfold? What would it look like? So that's actively kicking around in my head.
There's that undercurrent you've mentioned, and that's our current situation in life. We're in Canada, looking across the river and watching our American friends. We have our own issues here in Canada, but
Sure.
watching you guys from a distance, praying for you guys, hoping for you guys,
Yeah.
wanting the best. But there is this very interesting time of life right now, and the pandemic didn't help.
No,
I think it kind of stoked a fire that were embers that have been there for a long time. But
I would agree.
and is that another part of the book that's really important to you, is kind of navigating a little bit of that undercurrent?
Absolutely, because even though the book is primarily about baseball being lost and baseball being found again, baseball, when you really get down to it, is such an excellent metaphor for America itself. It really is. You hear that, the famous Terrence Mann quote on the Field of Dreams, when he's talking to Ray, which is in one of the epigraphs on the front of my book. But when you think about the current state of America and how polarized we are, we have two things going on. Number one, no compromise. Number two, no prisoners.
Mm.
And what's really been concerning to me is that I think it has really accelerated since the beginning of the pandemic. It was there before the pandemic, but since the pandemic started, what you see now is that you see this at the upper levels of state and federal government. You see this vitriol and the rhetoric that is so, when you get down to it, I mean, it really is kind of mean, and it's from both sides, in my opinion.
Mm-hmm.
And even though I'm a conservative, I freely admit that, but I have lots of friends that are and family that are liberals, and I love them, and we get along. And I think that's what's missing in our country: the ability to have an intelligent conversation about things and agree to disagree, and then continue to be friends, continue to be neighbors, continue to be citizens, and to move forward, into the future. And so, that undercurrent in the book that we mentioned is, even though the story begins in chapter 1, after all this has gone on in the past, the residue of what has happened in the past is a very powerful thing that the characters in the story remember, particularly the central character's name is Joe Scott. Joe Scott's grandfather was nicknamed Grandpa Moses, and particularly Grandpa Moses, who in my book I write as a survivor of what I call the Crucible generation. And he was a generation that was born after the war, when everything was a total wreck, and surviving day to day was a huge challenge, because we were still, basically in horse and buggy mode at that point.
When we talk about that undercurrent again, and the whole idea of not even be able to have a conversation with two people who can tend to not agree. I think there's back in the day, there was Siskel and Ebert, and they would review movies.
Right.
And many times they did not agree.
Correct.
But they didn't get angry or fight or walk off the set.
And part companies and leave the show like, I'm not going to come back to this show.
Yeah, you're a terrible person. I disagree with you completely. I'm canceling you, and you're nothing like that. They would totally go at each other. And then, thanks for watching. See you next week. We'll be back. Right. And I'm like, what a model for two gentlemen to completely disagree with each other, even mock each other at times.
Yeah.
But they could at least pull together, have a conversation, no matter how different they were. And I think that's probably the one thing, that's the undercurrent we're seeing in Canada as well, is a lack of communication, a lack of listening to each other.
Yeah.
And I'm finding in the podcast space that it's opening the door to more conversation without having to be edited. I've had people on my podcasts. I struggle sometimes to find something to talk about in agreement with, but my guest is a real person. Sure. They have real values, real concerns, real thoughts.
Yeah.
And no matter my opinion of them or their thoughts, they're a real person.
Sure.
And so I might be Siskel, they might be Ebert, but how can we make a great episode and a great conversation to help somebody else?
Exactly.
And I think that's another side of it too, that I wish we were better examples to the kids coming up about how adults can interact with each other. Because I think that would lead to more baseball in life, really.
Sure. Yeah, absolutely.
So I love that you've kind of taken a shot at this undercurrent, because it's got to be difficult to kind of walk that line of bringing something to light that maybe some people might not appreciate, but you find value in that. What is your hope in this book, that as a reader reads this, what are you hoping they're going to connect with, or what kind of things are you hoping to stir up for them as they read?
Well, one would be, for the love of the game again.
Yeah.
In its purest form, taking away all the accoutrements that are kind of clouded the game's popularity. It's just the love of the game again. And then also to hopefully foster a conversation about, particularly as Americans, where we are as a country and where we're headed. I'll tell you an anecdotal story. We're very popular in our church. Once a month, we have a prayer meeting. And I go into one of these prayer meetings, and a buddy of mine, great guy, I had not even talked to him in recent times. When he showed up, he'd been busy, I'd been busy, whatever. So when he showed up, and before we started, I said, I had this word that's been kicking around in my brain. And I said, the word is trajectory.
Mm-hmm.
And I told him, I said, and I'm using that word in context of where we are as a country and where we're headed, and the divisions that we have, and there just doesn't seem to be an answer. And so I told the group, and he was sitting right next to me. I says, unless something occurs to intercept that trajectory, there's only one probable endpoint. And before I even got the word endpoint out, he said Civil War. It just gave me goosebumps. I'm like, whoa. And when you read David Aikman's book, who I mentioned in the prologue, when the almond tree blossoms, and he paints this man. He was an ex-military guy, retired military, or no, he was a former New York Times foreign correspondent who wrote that book. And in that book, which was part of also one of the ingredients that went into my storyline in that book, it's conservative versus liberal. And unlike the old or the first Civil War in the 1860s, when you had this definitive dividing line, the Mason-Dixon line between North and South, and then eventually, obviously, the battle lines as they moved. But in his book, it was very muddled. You had liberal enclaves, and then you had mostly on the country, you had the conservative enclaves, and as the war unfolds, it's very confusing as far as it's going here, it's going there, and it's jumping around because you don't have this defined line.
Yeah.
So getting back in our country now, the way things are, I think what Aikman wrote is potentially going to be spot on if we ever come to that horrible point in time. So, which I pray not.
Yeah. No, and I think
I answered that question, right?
Oh, you did. Great.
I kind of went off on a tangent.
No, I love it. I think we've maybe forgotten the lessons that we potentially learned from our past.
Yeah.
And that's another scary.
Another thing I'd like people to take away from the book is that obviously, as you read it, there's a faith element in the book. It's not overpowering.
Yep.
It's not proselytizing, but it is there. And I think one thing that is alarming is the increasing loss of faith in our country.
Yeah.
And I just saw a story a day or two ago where there was some poll that came out and it talked about the percentage of Americans that would define themselves as atheists. It's gone way, way up.
Mm-hmm.
And if you're an atheist and you're listening, no offense, but when you're an atheist, I mean, I think there's less of an impetus to be loving to your neighbor. It's more of a dog eat dog kind of world, I think.
Yeah.
Because you don't have that moral framework that you get. For me, the Christian faith.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah, it's a very interesting time, right? And then on top of that, you add in social media and the power of the internet and how connected we are around the world all the time.
Yeah. Yeah.
You and I are having a conversation right now that if it wasn't for the internet, we wouldn't be doing right now. So It's a very interesting time. And again, I'm happy to hear how you've used baseball and the threat of losing a national pastime and what that could mean to the future of not just America, but life in general.
Yeah.
And how you're using that as a way to kind of say, hey, everyone, if we could be better people, us included, like not just you need to be a better person, but we need to be better. Right. I think we could not only just save baseball, but save our society too. And I love how you're using that as a leverage point. It's really good.
Yeah. And if you saw, one thing you can, I think, detect from the book as well, from the story, is that there's been sort of a reset with the family dynamics, Yeah. I talked about that at one point where, they had analysts after the war try to figure out how do we get to this point where we started killing one another in massive numbers.
Yeah.
And one thing that I write about was that one thing they found was was something simple. It was the family dinner time. The family dinner time is, not very common.
No,
Common.
no, you're
People are
right.
eating on the run because mom or dad is playing taxi driver, going to this event, and that sport, whatever. So they're wolfing down fast food in the van while everybody on one hand has their smartphone in their hand, and there's a total disconnect.
Yeah.
And so in the book, it's very intentional that, the family dinner is back. It's a very important part of everyday life where people get to sit down, break bread together, share each other's trials and triumphs of the day, and which all adds to I think, a healthy family dynamic and a healthy personal dynamic as well.
It's amazing. So as connected as we are, we're actually quite disconnected.
Yeah, isn't that paradox? It's a real paradox. It really is. It really is. It's amazing. You go by in the morning, you see a bunch of kids at a bus stop, and there's not a one of them with their head horizontal. All looking down.
Yep.
They're all looking down at the screens, and they're missing all these opportunities to make new friends and
or they're texting each other and they're like right beside each
they're
other.
3 feet away.
You're like, you could look at them, but no, I'll just send them a message.
I know. And I had I have 8 grandkids, all through my wife. And I had one, I'm not going to name her, but they put a voicemail on their voicemail saying, please don't call me, just text me. And I'm like, so I had a conversation with this grandchild, like, hey, come on. There's nothing wrong with calling one another and interacting with one another on the phone. You don't have to text all the time.
Yeah.
So hopefully I had an impact there.
Awesome. William, thank you so much for spending time with us today to talk about your book. It went by really fast, didn't it?
It did.
Right. What is the best way for people to find the book and connect with you?
Well, obviously Amazon, just search for The Death and Resurrection of Baseball. You can also find us at Barnes & Noble online, also Walmart and Apple Books, Target. They all have it available. So, and I would appreciate if you get it and like it, that you leave some good reviews, because it does help the rankings, especially on Amazon. So, which currently I'm at 4.5 stars on Amazon, and my book in the genre of it's young adult and teens, sports, fiction, baseball. I'm currently ranked, I think 62. So I broke the 100 barrier.
See, there you go. That's a good batting average.
Going up and down a little bit. So
that's a good batting average. I love it. Right. We tied it back to baseball. See,
right
there you go.
Yeah.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much, William. We're going to get people to come buy your book and to go check everything out. Thank you for your time today.
That'd be great. Thanks,
excellent.
Dave, for coming on.
Well done on your first podcast. You got many ahead of you. You did a great job.
Good.
Thanks.
Good.
Strike 3, you're out.
Hey guys, thank you for listening to the podcast. Jump over to livingthenextchapter.com, our website, and you will see a spot where you can leave a voice message. We'd love to hear your feedback. We're trying to make it as easy as possible to hear from you. So if you want your voice on this podcast, yes, that's possible. Go to livingthenextchapter.com. Click the little microphone icon, leave a voice message. We'll insert your message into the podcast. Tell us where you're listening from. Tell us your favorite guest. Maybe there's a guest we should have on the podcast. Maybe you should be our next guest. Leave us a message. livingthenextchapter.com. Again, thank you so much for listening. Please share this podcast episode with one person. That's all we're asking. Meet you over there at livingthenextchapter.com. Thank you for listening. Thank you for sharing. Love to hear from you. Till the next episode. It's coming up right away. Be sure you hit that subscribe button. Thank you for being part of Living the Next Chapter. Thank you for supporting our guests. Have a great day.